welcome to you, and thank you for joining us for the second episode of the Creative Knowledge Resources Conversations. The conversation series is aimed at generating dialogues between art practitioners, writers, and activists across modes of practice, across disciplines, and across generations. For this episode, we are thrilled to be in the company of Ingrid Masondo, who will steer today's conversation, with Ruth Seopedi Motau and Moira Forjaz to discuss the topic, photography and social engagement. For brief introductions, Ingrid Masondo is currently the curator of photography and new media at the Izigo South African National Gallery. She has worked in the creative industries for more than 2 decades. I'm sure it's more now, particularly in photography and music in a number of institutions, including the UWC, Robben Island, Maibuya Archives, Chimurenga Chronic, Badilisha Poetry Radio, among others. Ruth Seopedi Motau, based in South Africa, is a photojournalist who has worked with the Mail and Guardian, Sowetan, and the City Press. Ruth is a member of the Photography Legacy Project and the African Photojournalism Database, a project of the World Press Photo Foundation. And she's also a member of Black Women Photographers. Moira Forjaz, based in Mozambique, has worked as a photojournalist and documentary filmmaker since 1975. Among the films that she has directed, there is Dia Numa Aldea Comunal. And in 1982, the film received first prize at the Leipzig Film Festival. She's also the author and photographer of the book Mozambique, 1975 to 1985, which was the Jenny Crace Williams Book of the Year in 2015. If there is anything I have misrepresented in your biography, please feel free to correct me. I am so thrilled to welcome all 3 of our guests, and thank you in advance for being with us for this discussion. We really appreciate the time, but we're also really excited to have you all in this one space. Ingrid, thank you so much for agreeing to steer the conversation. I will now hand over to you.
Thank you, Nomusa. I'm equally thrilled to have Ruth and Moira here. It's taken us a while to organize this, as you know, and we're finally here. So welcome. What a pleasure to have you. So shall we get started?
Sure.
Perhaps we can start with, I'd like you to share some of your journeys with photography and in photography. Can we start there? Shall we go by generation? Yes, let's start with you, Moira.
Okay. Yes, it's a strange moment, actually, because if I think about it, maybe 60 years ago, I started taking photographs when I was probably 19 or something like that. And I came to it in a very strange way. I was a very close friend of a director of theatre called Barney Simon. And he took me to, I wanted a day job as well as being an art student. And so he said, I was already fond of photography. I had a little Pentax camera, and he took me to meet, what's his name now? God, that's one of my biggest problems is remembering people's names, but let me just get to it now. I had made it here. And the fact that I put it here made it worse, you know?
Should I try and guess?
Yeah.
Is it Goldblatt?
No, Goldblatt was later.
Later. Schadenberg, Jagan?
No, Schadenberg as well.
Schadenberg.
No, why can't I remember? I hope you're going to cut this out. Sam Haskins.
Sam Haskins.
Yeah. So that was the first real shock with photography because I was put in the dark room. And the dark room was where I had to do what I was told. And most of it was retouching photographs, originals, that came out. So I spent hours and hours in the dark room. And then, of course, I was at art school at the time. But I really got to understand quite a lot about photography working in that environment. And so that was my very first involvement in 1962, I would imagine it would be. So much later on, not much later on, actually, a year or so on, I met Jürgen Schraderberg, and I worked for him as an assistant, again, in the same capacity. And I learned immense things from him about photojournalism, not so much artistic photography. I also, oh gosh, that's my cat. I also, please go away. Please.
We don't mind your cat at all, Moira.
Okay.
It's all right. Yes.
Yeah, I know. There's food for you. Go and get it. Okay. So, yeah, with David, I even learned how to develop film with a green light. In other words, if you were never too sure if your films were properly lit, so you could easily change it in the development moment. You would look in a green light, see if it was okay, put it back in the developer, take it out again, and you could save lots of films that way. And the first job that I did with him as assistant was in Swaziland for riots that they were having in Swaziland, and we were sent together. And I could say that I was the poor person who had to run around taking the photographs, and Jürgen was having a good time sitting in the bar, so that was my first realization, of how tough it was to be a woman photographer at the time. So that was difficult. He was a fantastic photographer, and I learned immense from him in his studio called Tropics. It was called Tropics. Then he left, and David Goblat and I took over the studio with Linton Stevenson. I don't know if you might have heard about him. He was a fantastic photographer. He died. He's no longer alive. He was a fantastic commercial photographer, one of those really beautifully lit photographs, and whatever he did was amazing. And we took over, and we worked in the studio for quite a long time. And again, David was also new at his work in those days. He'd been working as a photographer, but he'd only just decided to make it his full-time job, and to work as a photographer. And so I think you've gone to sleep, or are you awake?
No, we're listening. We're attentive. We're paying attention.
No, I thought maybe you'd gone to sleep, all of you. And so I'm very nervous, I don't like speaking about myself, especially as I'm talking about 61 years ago. And sure. and to actually put it all together, it's not difficult because it was all so clear that I wanted to be a photographer. And I did as much as I could. Then came the time of reality. Ruth, the first, was a very close friend of mine, and I got myself into a little bit of trouble. And when she left, she actually was arrested leaving our house where I was living with my aunt. And so really I had to make a move out of South Africa, even though I wasn't as involved. I was very young at the time. And but before I went, I did a couple of little visits to Mozambique to deliver a letter and another letter, but I never knew quite what the letters were, but it was safer for me not to know, not even to who I have the final destination of the letter. And so I realized how important photography was for me. And I took wonderful pictures in Mozambique, but like anybody on the move and not realizing quite how important these were at the time and how we should have been preparing for history. Lots of the negatives got spoiled. I have a few left over from that period, left in somebody's house, not taking it seriously, not building the archive. Much later, I built up the archive. And but I was shown around Mozambique and the disasters of Portuguese colonialism. And I did take some pictures, which in fact went back to Ruth at the time, but I never understood what if they were used or not. In New Age, she was working in that newspaper called New Age, and where I did, it was all pretty minor young person's job, just that was, I knew that I was, going to want to work with the camera. In fact, a friend of mine, her son went out with us shooting with me, and I was looking after them. He and his brothers, two brothers, and he was asked, did he have a nice time? And he said, yeah, quite nice. It was just Moira pretending to be a photographer. She had two cameras. And so that was, already, I was obviously, because it was not common to see a woman walking around with two cameras, at the time. But of course, children see things differently. It was a little boy. And so, yeah, so that was a beginning. And then I left Africa. And, sometimes when you move from, many people know this, you have to reinvent yourself somewhere else. And, it's not so easy. I landed up in London and, I had one amazing opportunity while I was there. I went to a film festival in Leipzig. This is very strange because it was my first film festival that I went to in Europe. And the film festival with a friend of mine and her husband who was involved with the cinema. And I met some people who asked for photographs of the festival, So in fact, I didn't sell them, I gave them photographs. So there's one that I had, one friend that I had, met and kept up a time with, and I think he stayed in touch with me a bit, but not much. But that led to my meeting my husband, all of that, and then going to Portugal to live. And that was no way. You had to reinvent yourself by, what I did was I had a gallery for photographers because there was no way that I was going to get a job anywhere. I tried several places, but it wasn't possible. So then that's what happened, so from then onwards, of course, there was, we left there, and then there was the revolution in Portugal, the 25th of April. I was now married, living in Swaziland by this chance, and we had kept up a relationship with Frelimo in those days. And it was a natural thing for us to go to Mozambique. And that's where I really can say I worked daily, day and night, not just finding a job here and there to do. I don't know if you ever heard of a jazz group called Brotherhood of Breath. Chris McGregor,
Johnny, yes.
Hulu, and oh my God, and Juju Pokwane, and Luis Maholo. They're not alive anymore. But
Luis Maholo is still alive in Cape Town.
Is he? Oh my God! I didn't mean to. I just assumed that they'd all disappeared by now. They would be older than me. Oh, great. They all came and lived with me in London. So you can tell Louis Maholo, Louis, it's not Louis, it is Louis, who is still alive?
Yes.
Louis
he lost his wife last year, but he's
okay.
alive. Yes.
Might remember staying 6 months on my living room floor, all of them, because they had been kicked out of their digs at the time, and they all landed up. Chris, his wife at the time, who was Maxine, and all of them landed up on my. They stayed for about 4 to 6 months until they ruined everything and had to leave. And but those were the times. It was all in good faith. I mean, we put up with a lot in those days, and so I took a lot of photographs of them. Once again, I still have some. In fact, I still have some, but they don't fit into. They're there, you know, photos and whatever. But then going to Mozambique, it was a job. You know, I worked for the institute first for the IM, the Department of Information. And of course, I had to do the floods and the this and the that, whatever was going on. But I was the only woman photographer all the years that I was there, the 10 years I was there. And it was a great privilege to have that experience. I mean, not everybody would have that experience, especially with Samora. And the stories that I was able to and encounters that I had with these marvelous people, one of them, you know, being Samora himself. And I mean, there's hundreds of stories I could tell you about that time. But of course, it was a sad time too, because in 1982, I was with Ruth, and I met her when I was very young, and then she came to live in Mozambique, and that's where she was assassinated 5 minutes after I'd left her at her job. You know, said I'll be back in 10, and that was it. I never could see her again, and so that's life, you know. But everybody was around. Even your ex-president stayed in our house when we were there many years ago. So
which are you referring to? The ex?
Oh, I was too scared to ask.
Yeah.
Zuma. He was very young. He was very, very young and very, I would say, sort of interesting man in those days, for, you know, not so much conflict around him. But he was very young. He stayed in the little guest house that we had, or guest house of, guest room, I think it was in those days. So, you know, but there is a story I can tell you, which is very funny, and this proof of being the only woman photographer. Samora was very, very, very conscious of photography. He had huge respect for the person walking around with the camera. He would always tell security, get out of the way, get out, let them do their job, you know. He was very, very caring about the gathering of history information through photography. And that, you know, was quite a lesson to learn. And so there was an accident, wasn't actually an accident, it happened to be cousins of mine from Zimbabwe. The two young men were flying over Mozambican territory in Chumani Mountains, and they were shot down by Mozambican. This is during the war with civil war, really, Renamo and all of that. I didn't want to talk too much about all that, and one of the pilot was killed and the passenger was alive. So Red Cross got in touch with me and said, you have an uncle who has a son-in-law who's just been, we think he might be dead. One of the passenger, the pilot was dead, but the other might be alive. Can you please find out? So I had to go and speak to Samora and say, you know, I have this, you know, Red Cross have asked me please to do this, and so he said to me, come back in 3 days. I went back for another audiencia, and he told me that he was alive. and that the Cubans were working on him. Anyway, to cut a long story short, 2 years later, Samora, and he kept giving, not him, he sent messages. He's alive, he's okay, he's walking, and I would relay these to the Red Cross. And this went on for a while. And about 2 years later, it must have been, must have been 2 years later, because it was in 1980. Yeah, it would have been in 1980. It was before Ruth died, surely. Yes, it was before Ruth died. I got an invitation to oh yes, it would be, yes, it was independence in Zimbabwe. And I got a special invitation to go with Samora in the plane, the official plane, to Zimbabwe. I couldn't figure out why I would have been chosen out of everybody else to be in the plane with him, to be traveling together with him. And I went. And when we were flying in, he called me to the front, says, you get out first and you take some picture. And I said, Comrade Samora, I'll be in real trouble with the other photographers. Don't worry about the other photographers, take your photos, and which I did. And he was very kind to me in that way, and so at the final luncheon or dinner, must have been, or the end of the cocktails, he called me over, sent out, and I thought, God, what have I done now? And he called me over and he said to Mugabe, he said, you see, you remember those, and he told the story of the crash, which I'd long forgotten about. I didn't associate the two things, my being there. And he said, you remember that case about the guys that flew over our territory, and this is, she's one of us, but she was defending this young man. Of course, they made a deal at some stage, and the deal was he got swapped with somebody else at the border in South Africa, and he was freed. He never spoke badly about his stay. Well, they saved his life, the Cubans, they really did. But what I'm trying to say, the photography life that I had was very, very, very special, very special. And I've, I can say that it's been, uphill most of the time, except, of course, when you had to change your life, and you had to work in another field to look after your son and be in another country, and it was never easy to get a job as a photographer, but I continued doing it as much as I could. I don't know, is it not?
We will carry on. You have given us a lot. I can imagine 60 years of practice.
60 years of practice.
I would just like to bring in Ruth a little bit. Ruth, could you share your journey with us, and maybe also bringing in some of the issues that Moira has brought on about the context you worked in, being a woman, and so forth, and maybe the lack of support that you had.
And also white. We have to remember.
Okay. Yep, right.
Okay.
Where are you? Oh, there you are. Beautiful Ruth.
As a photographer, I really don't like putting black in a context, but yes. I think I was, that time, the only black, and I think most of the time when I will go on assignment, it will be like very odd, and most of the time people will look at me and then asking me, where do I come from, who do I work for? But interestingly, then I worked for the Mail and Guardian, and I remember. I remember when they would ask, or maybe if you go to the ANC gathering or whatever, they used to, be in their little corners. And, some of them, they even confess that, we fear your newspaper. And every Friday, we are the first one to go and see, what did you guys cover, you know? But yeah, my journey with photography also, it ranges from meeting. I also work with Jürgen in his darkroom.
Jürgen Schattenberg?
Yes, I did.
Drum.
Yeah, but
Oh.
not for long, yes. And David Goldblatt was my teacher. And then
I didn't realize that.
And then
my God, that's so interesting.
Yeah, and then I taught at Alf Kumalo School. And then, you know, there will be people along my journey, which is like your Greg Marinovich, Kevin Carter, you know, your James Nachtwey, but very closely, maybe the South Africans one. And they really helped me in shaping my career. And I think it was interesting time when I started during the 90s, in the early 90s. And if I was given an assignment to go to Togoza or Soweto to cover the riots, you know, I would say no, but that's not my cup of tea, you know. And luckily, the people that I worked with, they really loved it. So I was saved from it. And they said, no problem. And then I covered the arts and then did features and stuff like that. Things that were boring to them, for me, that was like a real meal, you know? Mm. And as I was working for a newspaper, and then I realized that covering the news was like instant. We go and report and come back. And I was quite worried about how we were portrayed as Black people and how stories were covered. And I felt more justice was not done because it was always negative stories. And luckily, because I worked for Mailing Guardian, which was a weekly paper, and I took upon myself and say, you know, there is more to life and beautiful things in the Black community rather than poverty, violence, absolutely. You know, all those things. So I started to document all those things by myself, you know, because I was part of it. Being Black, being there, also it was sort of like a challenge. I remember once I went to the hostel, do a feature. And, you know, first thing that you do normally is to ask for permission. And then, you know, the hostel, it's, you know, mostly dominated by the Zulu men, and then, you know, very, very rough and harsh ones. But because I was Black, and this tiny one, this very tiny person, they were interested in like what I'm going to do. And even though I explained, but, you know, they just couldn't get it that a Black woman I also had, by that time, I had 2 cameras with me, you know, and no flash. I normally, when I do my work, I don't use flash. So, and then they will sort of like have a debate, and then some will be teasing me, some will be annoying me, but I will be there just as to get, you know, my pictures. But even though, you know, the first time they didn't agree, and then the second time I went, and then, you know, they agreed. But yeah, it has been a very good journey. It has been very smooth sailing. I never had problems, quite honestly. Even with my colleagues in the field, they've been very supportive. You mentioned your Walter Dladla, your Peter Magubane, your Judah Ngwe, you know, all those people, your Kevin Carter, your Greg Marinovich, you know, I think I was protected in a way. I was protected, and they always willing to help me, you know, to navigate through. So very smooth sailing.
Very
And yeah.
Very,
Thank you.
Can I just put a light on here? As you can see, we're
Yes, please put on a light. Can you hear me whilst you put on a light, or must I pause a little bit, Moira?
Hang on 1 second, it's right here. I just have to find this. Oh God, it's in the dark.
Oh, there it goes. Are you okay, Moira?
Yeah, there you are.
Aha, there's the light. That's okay. We can see you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
I
So,
couldn't see myself.
We can see you.
Yeah.
Thinking of the two of you and starting off in different times, Moira started talking about her first job being in the dark room. And I imagine you were quite immersed in the dark room too, Ruth, when you studied, even though it was a few decades later. So I'm wondering what's your process and practice like now? How has it changed over time with the developments in technology, infrastructure? How is your working now? Could I start the other way this time, Moira? Can I start with Ruth and then I'll come back?
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
I think how I approach my work now, it's quite different. The technology has changed, and quite honestly, I don't feel safe to walk around with a camera now. And if I do, I will rather have, people around me. I think there's so much people around you that, you're thinking maybe they will sort of like grab your camera or whatever. I mean, even before it used to be, I'll just go anywhere and just introduce myself and then take out the camera and I'll be, just take photographs. Recently, I like to go downtown and there are so much, there's a lot of images that I see and I get so frustrated that I can't even take out my phone. I can't do anything. I'm scared. I am scared. But I tell you, if I had an opportunity to go downtown and take images, even now, as I was driving under the bridge in my mind, and I'm thinking, this time in the afternoon, and then the flames of the taxis, and I just saw images, but I can't take them. And it's heartbreaking that you see some other things that you want to record, and then as part of history, but because of fear, you really cannot do that. A couple of years ago, I did a feature in the same under the bridge without any fear. But now it has changed so drastically, more interesting, but I can't do it, So I need to have the courage to do it. And I really, I don't, but I try sometimes. Yeah.
And in terms of producing photographs, how has that changed from actually making a photograph to an actual print? Just I'm thinking, are you still developing and printing your own materials? How has that affected you, time and technology?
I think nowadays, when you take your digital camera, you take a photograph. And
are you saying that you photograph with a digital camera now? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Okay. All right. I was checking.
and then you look at it, and if I don't like it, I delete it. And then I take another one. And if I don't like it, I delete it. Whereas when I was doing analog, I would think, I would sit and I would, visualize and be very careful of what I'm doing. But now it's like, it doesn't really matter. I can repeat it again and again and again and again. Or maybe I can shoot one subject like maybe 100 frames. But before, it wasn't like that. You really have to be disciplined. You really have to think about what you do. But now I think now the camera can do it for me, Most of it, it's been done by the camera.
Mm. And what about you, Moira? I was smiling when I heard you telling the story about a Pentax, because that was my first camera too. I think that those were the cameras.
I think it was everybody's first camera. It was a fantastic little camera. Nothing much changed after that.
Yeah. Okay.
No,
so how are you working now? How has time and technology impacted your practice?
Depends on the country. Whilst I was in Mozambique, it was that first of all, I can't photograph squalor. I can't go into a burnt out house with people dying. I've never been able to turn my camera onto that. So I didn't have, although I was involved with it because, you know, we saw things like that when we were doing our job, but I always found something different in that situation. So if you see in my book, sometimes there was poverty, but there was a life, you know, and a clear, wonderful woman with a small baby, and or you know, very shy, showing me her house and whatever it was might have been, or carrying water, or so I didn't actually point my camera at the you know, what I know in Portuguese, but sensationalist, since, you know, photos. And what happened is that I have a record of life in Mozambique in the times where it was drastic and very dangerous to be around, with my colleagues who were running after, you know, guys with guns, you know, and I'm not that kind of photographer. I would never go where there was danger. So that's one time. And then when I did want to, my life changed enough and I had time to photograph again. Yeah, I went through different stages of the arts, you know. I had the gallery, which would sell wonderful photographs of other people, not me, not my own at the time, and or whatever. I was given as a gift a camera called a Nikon, or Nikon as they call it, FD. It was a Nikon F digital, or Nikon digital F, depends on which way you say it. And I never looked at the photographs that I took. I never looked to see, because I didn't look, and that I only worked through the viewfinder.
Yeah.
So my photographs are not always perfect, because I was taking them as they were as it was an analog. So I was focusing, and as I grew older, my focusing had more and more problems. I had to buy a new, what you call it in English, diaphragm, where you focus. What does that say? I've forgotten what you call it. Diaphragm. Viewfinder. Yes.
A viewfinder, yeah. You can say it in Portuguese. Teachers, let's talk all the languages.
Then it becomes too complicated. A viewfinder, I bought it because the camera came with its final destiny, and you know how you adjust the camera when you're taking the picture. And that I got in Johannesburg. I managed to get a larger one, and now that one's gone. I need to find one in South Africa. So to do my second or the third book that I have is called Island, older values, old people and of the island, and in English and in Portuguese, values.
This is the Islanders book.
The Islanders book, and that is taken with a digital camera, but people who have looked at the pictures said, oh, you using your analog camera? No, it's a digital, because I don't use it I never had this. I couldn't use it. I didn't know how. I didn't know how to manipulate all those instructions, you know, and I've never used it. I've only ever used it as an analog. without film.
Okay.
So that's what happened to me, and I still have it, except I'm waiting now for the diaphragm, the viewfinder, to come from America, because in South Africa they don't have it for old people that can't see, because I had to see to take the picture, you know, through the viewfinder. How does Ruth take through the viewfinder? She doesn't use the view.
Tell us, Ruth.
Do you use the viewfinder?
Yes, I use the viewfinder.
You do?
No, yes, I use the viewfinder because I'm used to, like, you know, I think using the viewfinder, it's much easier for me because I'm used to, you know, I normally have the, like, your board and then, and then, you know, pull it in and out. And then I really want to frame with my eye. I want to put it, yes.
I wonder if there was the preference. So the preference is for analog, because it sounds like even the digital.
Yes, the preference. The other real problem with this is that you're in competition. A really big problem. Sorry.
No problem at all. But so how do you move?
The really big problem is that we have such competition nowadays that you have to really know what you want to photograph before you go out. You know, you have to find, and that's why in that book I chose and limited my scope. You know, had to walk around the island finding these old people, talking to them, getting interviews from them, and that was why I could photograph. Otherwise, I don't carry my camera around with me. You know, I have to have a job to do, and it's just a way. I've always been like that. But this camera is fantastic, though it's become so unpopular. Most photographers don't like it.
Which one is that?
Is this the Nikon?
Nikon FD. It's a Nikon F, you know, like a Nikon FD digital. And I'll get it.
And your relationship with the darkroom, Ruth? Don't run away. She wants to show us.
I miss it. I miss the smell of the chemicals, you know. I'm developing.
Let me show you. It's important. You can cut it out. You can. Look here.
Aha! See that?
Okay.
Do you want to hear it?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, it's true. There's no light. No way to hear it. But it makes the same sound. And everything is the same. You know, you change the aperture here. You do everything the same.
Yeah.
Like, I could only do it that way because I couldn't figure out the digital
ones,
side.
Yeah.
Ruth was just telling us how she misses the darkroom and even the chemicals and everything.
Me too.
When last were you in the darkroom, and how do you produce the prints? Is it somebody else now? And you started off also saying, Moira, it always depended where you were on the context. And you've been through Swaziland, Mozambique, London, Portugal. So in this context that you're in, you've been in Mozambique for a while. How is that infrastructure for developing, for printing your own work? Has that been easy or not?
Oh, probably not, because it really, I felt the same way as Ruth in a way. You feel, first of all, you can't take photographs of people because they can get irritated with you. And it's very hard. So even if you're walking in New York street and you see something you like with a whole lot of people looking at you, if you take the picture, they may not be thieves, but they will certainly come at you and be annoyed that you took the picture. And so, you know, it's become more difficult. And we're against so many iPhones and, you know, sneaky things that people can take, and beautiful, easy photographs. And why not? Why not? You know, I wouldn't fight against it. Ruth, you're still young. I would find my way out of it, you know, how make it as, you know, don't carry your camera around, but go and do what you want to take, what you feel like, you know,
But
and
you know,
limit.
when I travel, it's much easier. I do it with my phone and
Yes.
get away with it quickly. Huh? Yeah. But here at home, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can do it at certain places, but where you have more interesting images, I really can't do it because the place is just too crowded. You don't know who's watching you. And
you don't know who's watching, who's going to snatch your phone away.
Yeah.
Or your camera.
Gone, you know? Or maybe you can be stabbed or, you know, or being gunned down. I don't want to be killed for a cell phone. I don't want to be killed for...
I agree with you. I never put myself in harm's way. I have a son, I have 3 grandchildren, and I don't, photography is, I mean, maybe I was a bit, you know, I went into these houses, very poor houses, and maybe might have got malaria or something like that, but not, people here are very, very gentle, very lovely people. You should try to see the book and read the stories. They are in the first person. They are in the first person, the stories. I think it's still available at exclusive books somewhere.
Okay.
I'll look for it. I know the other one, the Mozambique one. I've seen the Mozambique one, and I haven't seen the Islanders, but I'll look some more.
The Mozambique one is not available anymore. It's out of print. Because
the Book Lounge, a bookshop in Cape Town had it. That's where I got mine.
Really?
Yes.
When? Recently?
Maybe it's about 2-3 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You're lucky. You can't find it anymore. And I've only got one ransacked copy of it myself. So,
you both touched on several things about maybe the infrastructures and just thinking of the books that you've been talking about, Moira. So, you know, and these various places and contexts where photography ends up in, having started as photojournalists. It's a roundabout question. I'm wondering, what's your relationship with text? You know, when I worked when I was a student of photography, and then I taught at the photo workshop, I found so many of the students so resistant to writing and reading text, which I think is really, really key. So I guess it's about that, and then leads to publishing. And it's a very different outlet to a newspaper, to what you've also worked with. Where are you thinking of publishing some books, Ruth? What do you think about text also? Is it closely, do you work closely with text? Do you get someone else to write?
Me writing only if it was something about me, but you know, I'm not brave enough to have opinions about, you know, I don't think that's why hello?
We're listening.
Somebody's on Ruth. Okay. I didn't see Ruth for a minute. The book, the one that I was talking to you about, it is a book of text as well, you know, but not my text.
Okay.
And they were first person interviews. But I do, in fact, David Goblat was always adamant that you know, if you can't put a word to your photographs, you know, he felt it was important always. He always documented his photographs. And I'm a little bit, I admired David's work. When I say we were both starting off, David had been taking photographs, but not professionally as a photographer when we met. So we talked a lot about photography, and he encouraged me in later life when he did go one way. You know, women, it's sometimes not so easy just to stay and be on track with your photography, because you know there's always the problem with the family life and where you are, where you want to go, and so you know it's not so easy to be a professional photographer and be able to go on different trips around the world and do this, do that, which, and or even in the country, David could be devoted totally to his photography. I was sometimes
the story of gender.
Yeah, gender.
How it works. Yeah.
Sometimes it just wasn't possible, you know, and maybe not taking us serious enough to make it possible at the time, you know. So I lost a few years. I always had really wanted to do more work. I've got millions of photographs.
Well, you've got time, Moira.
Yeah, waiting for time.
Yeah, invite us to come assist.
Yes, come here.
Yes.
Or
But Ruth, do you want to comment?
Ruth would like to come.
I'd like to bring you into the conversation about text and words and books.
Would you like to come, Ruth?
You know, I think for me, when I also started, luckily enough, I loved reading. And then when I worked at the Mail and Guardian, you know, Mail and Guardian, it's so text driven. And, you know, sometimes when you get your story, when we're doing our pages early in the week, I'll sort of like go through the stories, you know, you read. And I think for me, it was quite easier that I would write my own captions, or maybe even though I go out and do my little stories as features, and then I'll come back and you know, and do some bit of writing do some bit of writing, even though they will just jack it up to sound very nice. Yeah, but I think photographers nowadays, or photographers, they think taking photographs, that's it. But you need to write your captions. And I think most importantly, when I was editing the 3 publications as a pictures editor, the most mistake that photographers do is to forget to ask their subject how they pronounce or spell their names.
Spell their names. Yeah, absolutely. That was the first thing I did.
And you know, but you know, the younger generation, you know, you always say, I'll give them a notebook and a paper, say, don't write it yourself. Give a pen and whatever to the person and let them write it. Because every time when they write it, they just spell it wrong. I don't know how, but they just spell it wrong. Yeah, I mean, I think, but I do my own writing, and I'm hoping that
I've never wanted to. You know, yes, that's wrong. I learned a bit with Ruth first, because lots of my assignments in the Mozambican time were with Ruth first. We went to interview the miners coming back from the gold mines, and of course, I was involved with the text as well. And there is a book that I think it's available now, maybe not anymore. It was called Black Gold. It was Ruth last. I don't think she saw it finally published. She was killed before that was published. But it's my photographs in that book about the gold miners from Mozambique.
Okay, maybe we'll switch a little bit. You know, there is this thing, because of the accessibility of photography, that it's a democratic medium. I'm curious to hear your thoughts or reflections about that.
I don't understand it.
You don't understand that because it's so wildly accessible, I think, in terms of other art forms and technological developments. And like now we have cameras on phones that so many people can make photography, and therefore photography tends to be drawn into these conversations about democracy and social movements or struggles for freedom and so forth. What do you have a comment or reflections about that?
I think we have something, you know, in America, when the Senate was raided, photography played one of the biggest parts of that. Results of everything was the fact that people could take photographs and instead of running away, click a picture, you know, they could do that. And lots of what happened was photographed, what happened in that takeover. And in a way, I think that photography now can be a very good medium for security. I mean, the camera now is up on the building. We say that's terrible, but
surveillance.
Surveillance. We are being surveilled everywhere, and that's terrible.
Right now.
But at the same time, there isn't a security because if something happens to you, or if your money is stolen by somebody while you're taking it out of the internet, what you call it, the
ATM.
Multibanco, the ATM, Multibanco. I sometimes can't speak the English anymore. Multibanco.
Neither can we.
But you can, yes, we could, no, not luckily, not at all. But you could find the assailant, the crook, you know, and maybe get your money back. But people run immediately to see that camera if they need to. So I think that the image, maybe not just photographing, has become very powerful because something happens in the street and of course, with what was his name? I mean, oh my God, you see my brain. That's amazing, terrible thing with the man with the policeman killing him on his, what was it called? What's his name?
Albisex?
No. I'm talking about recently, you know.
In Johannesburg.
No, in America.
Okay.
Been many.
What's his name again?
Okay.
The black guy who was killed by the policeman with his his foot on his...
Floyd something.
Floyd.
Martin,
Yeah.
George Floyd.
Let's talk about George Floyd, because I made the fact I couldn't remember is kind of scary. Well, George, look at that. That was just this iPhone, you know. She just was persevered and she stayed there and she started a revolution, you know. I mean, I think photography has a place to play in, I don't know if you call it in the democracy, but certainly it is available as we have no restrictions. I mean, you couldn't do that so easily here because the security guy will come and stop you from taking a photograph of somebody they didn't want you to photograph, you know. But in America, that doesn't happen. There's no
restrictions like that.
There's restrictions, yeah. So there, you know, free press is the most important thing, really. And free press means you can take photographs with what you want in certain countries, but not in every. I don't know about South Africa, if you can take a picture or will they come after you?
Well, I mean, sometimes they will do come after you, you know, it depends also. And again, also, it might also be the subject. Let's say maybe you take photographs of the thieves or the police doing illegal stuff. Yeah. And that puts you, you know. Yeah, but responding to the question that Ingrid asked about photography, cell phones, how everybody now takes, you know, photographs. But I think when we take photographs, whether with a cell phone or with our digital cameras, now everybody can take a photograph, but I think it's different from me. If I say I want to, there should be a why I pick up my camera and go out and do a story.
Yeah.
And maybe in that way, if I need to tell a story, there is a why, and then there will be the results. And with my pictures, I don't manipulate, and of which I think most of the things that they do now, it's like 90 or 100% of it, it's manipulation. So you can't even trust it.
It's become art rather than photography.
Yeah.
It's what rather than
for
photography?
us, when we decide,
it's become an art
sometimes
form.
it's not.
Aha. Okay. Sorry, Ruth.
Yeah, and sometimes when we do that kind of work, I mean, I don't manipulate my photographs. What I photograph, it's what I see, and that's real, you know. I can play around with light, but I don't doctor anything. I don't, put stuff that's not there and then make it like it works. So for me, when people do that kind of photography, for me, it's not photography. So then, you talk about a camera doesn't lie, but there it lies because it's not what it was there, So, yeah.
I can see that. I can see that. David was true to himself in that way, He could walk for hours and hours to look for the right sunset or whatever that he wanted the field, the photograph to
and he
show
will
us.
stand for hours, hey, for that one shot.
One shot, I wrote that in my book. About him.
Accidentally, I was telling Mpumi about that incident. Like today, photographers, they can produce one image in a second with the 100 images, and if they don't like them, they delete them. But with us, you'll have maybe, let's say, 20 frames in a film, and you really have to make sure that the lighting is right and the moment is right. That's discipline there,
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, and it becomes more and more difficult because again this this feeling that everybody can take a photograph now, and we call ourselves photographers, but everybody would say photographer. Why is she a photographer and I'm not? And maybe everybody that carries their camera, they are photographers at that moment when they're taking a picture, and we have to work hard to maintain a household on being a photographer, because we have to go a step further. You have to sell it, you have to make it into a book, you have to. And then the book cost more than it should have cost, So it's, in the end, it's not easy to make a living as a photographer until you get to it, until you are lucky enough to get into a position. I mean, I've only been able to sell my photographs quite recently, and I'm going to be 80 in April, So I can't say that I made it.
You look young. You look very young.
Thank you. No manipulation. It's all myself. No bottles. No. No, I think I might have. I must have, I think I have somewhere along the line, we have Oriental blood, because I believe that a great grandfather of mine was from Mongolia. And it actually it could be because I have very good skin, strong skin.
Lucky
And
you.
so,
Yeah.
so I'm very lazy about myself. You're not going to put all of this in this.
Yeah.
That's the problem. That's the problem. I don't know what's real and what's not real about this interview, but I do hope you make it.
Well, you were.
I think
we were talking about real and unreal photographs too, so it's all real, Moira.
Yeah,
but we
real.
probably have to sort of think about wrapping up, right, Nomusa? Can I ask for?
Yes.
Do I have time for a last question?
We have time for the last question, and then I'll close for us.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So it's also something that Moira touched on earlier, and it's about your archival practice. She was relating to how she didn't think her negatives, or keeping all of them and caring for them and all of that. And I guess it extends beyond negatives, because Ruth, you probably have less negatives now because you photograph digitally. So what has been your archival practice throughout, and how are you seeing that now? And also perhaps talk to photography education in that sense. Do you think archival practice should be part of the curriculum? Is it important? I never learned about that. So
yeah.
Would you like to start, Ruth?
Okay. I think that archiving your material, it's quite important because it's your legacy, it's your legacy. And I have been privileged more enough that when I started photography, and most of the projects that I did, I did them in my own will, and I retained the copyright. So I've got like a body of work where some of my colleagues, most of them, they don't have, because they didn't have the copyright to their work. I mean, they were just sent on assignment, and then they'll do like grade work, whatever. But yeah, I was fortunate enough to have and preserve my work, my negatives, and yeah, I'm slowly now trying to, work on them. It's very time consuming, but and I think archiving should be part of the curriculum of photography, because sometimes people just take photographs. I mean, I made some mistakes also on one of my negatives. Some of my negatives, they don't have details, but sometimes, when you have really taken the shots, you can take your mind there, but you cannot remember the years. Maybe you can sort of like think, or maybe there, but yeah, I think archiving is really important, so that, when you go back 20 years later, you still have all the details about what you have done. Not like, we try to write the CKR and write funny names or broad captions or information. It's really, really important. Yeah.
Absolutely.
If I can just say something before you come in, Moira. I don't know what the situation is in Mozambique, but I guess it might be similar in South Africa, where a lot of photographers, especially the older generation, they didn't have that practice. They were never taught to look after their negatives, so a lot of them are destroyed. But there are some who have kept, or even their families have kept their work, but there's a question of institutional support, what to do with this work, where does it sit, what happens to it, who processes and does the work of archiving, which is also important, because I think, it's one thing for us to be teaching archival practice and all of this at schools, but at the end of the day, where do photographers take their work? Who's going to take care of it?
Trust?
Yeah.
And who can you trust again? Who can you trust? That's important.
That's what I'm saying.
too.
Who can you trust? But I have a problem, a question to ask after I've done this. My negatives are in Johannesburg, because
who?
I was lucky enough to take my negatives to Portugal when I left Mozambique, because my friends and colleagues have lost all their negatives with the humidity, not even by being, I just had that, I was lucky. That's why the photographs in the 1975, 85 book, they're all 40 years old or 50 years old, some of them. And I know that David had very good negatives taken care of in South Africa, because it's not such harsh like humidity and heat and whatever. So my negatives were in Portugal, and then I brought them back, and they're with a friend in Johannesburg, my negatives. But I have to do something about that one of these days. I don't know what to do. Can't come back to Mozambique because the weather situation is so bad here. People have lost, other great photographers have lost their negatives, like Koknam's negatives. And Rangel better. No, Rangel was better. He looked after his, but Koknam, but I don't know where all his negatives are now, but lots of them were in bad shape. And others, when they worked for different magazines. And that's the other thing, is that a lot of my photographs, have negatives, I was going to say, have gone to where they were the owner, like the client who was in Mozambique very often was the security or this, or they sent you to do this, and they kept your but you always managed to steal a couple, the big ones, the ones you really like, the ones that were not always. But now I ask you, what about, I've just had a crash in my camera, my computer, and I lost a lot of negatives. I have them backed up, but they are in the sky somewhere. But, that's not in the clouds, that's not exactly a sure business either. We don't know how long.
Hard drive, Moira. Must have another hard drive. And then
I have them.
Copy that to another, hard drive and hide it away. You can have two.
No, I have that. I have that, but I don't think they last long even on the hard drive.
Okay.
That's the thing. I think all these materials deteriorate over time, right? It's not just the negatives. I think that's what you're saying. Also, hard drives, CDs. I have a lot of my archive on CDs, and it plays one day, it doesn't. They don't even want to make computers with DVD and CD players. So it's like we're constantly playing catch up. But it's a really difficult situation with a whole range of generations that have produced work, and what happens.
My digital, I don't understand how to save. So we have to do something. We have to select and, in fact, make a digital copy of it.
You need the younger ones to come in and teach you, or maybe just hire a student to come and do it for you.
Yeah.
I also find it very hard and difficult to sort of like maneuver in this. When you ask them, they just take your laptop and then they does things they don't explain to you, and you're thinking, I'm asking you to do this to show me, So it's a struggle.
It is a struggle. It is a struggle, and we were worried about the negatives, but now what about the digitals? I think they also.
But don't worry, the analog is coming back. The analog is coming back. You think so? Negatives are coming. Yes, no.
The negatives would outlive your hard drives, Moira. Your negatives will outlive your hard drives.
Yes, and I've got my two cameras still, my analogs. The Nikons here sitting up on the shelf.
Yeah, so selfies are back. So I'm sure analog will also be back.
No, it's really coming back. And it's more expensive. it's more expensive to work on it, you know?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Anyway, this has been a really interesting talk. I would have liked to have found myself in better shape, but one of the, this is off the record. One of the things that happened to me in this fall.
I must visit Moira, you know?
Huh?
I must visit
She wants
you.
to visit you.
Yes, that's what I was thinking, because I wanted off the record. I have a center which is called here on the island. It's the people. It's inside of an area like it. You could call it it's not slum, but it's poor people's area, and it's called a knowledge center. We don't teach anything. We talk about knowledge. We give knowledge. We bring you to say what it was like for you. You know what I mean? It's called a knowledge center. It's called Wishuta, which is the name in Makua here. Center de Estudo, study center. So we study everything, and we have music. Who was saying somebody had music? You were the music person.
I used to work in music. I'm very interested in music.
And one of the main reasons is that we have this is because of music. I've just bought a beautiful piano, a Yamaha digital, because nothing would survive the humidity here. The thing would just, decay. But a very good one. And we're looking for a pianist who's trained as a teacher, a photographer, a piano teacher. So it's not just for making music; it's teaching people to know how to read music, to know what to do with music, and we're looking all over for somebody like that.
I thought you were about to invite us to start a band, Moira, together.
Yeah, no, if you came, we would make a band. We've got a guitarist, we've got a pianist, we've got everybody. But my problem is I want things to go further than just me. I want some young girl to be brought, and she's so talented. And, you find people around in this area where we're working, and it would be great to make contacts with the university. Well, South Africa is so vast, and Mozambique is still way behind. We here, but it's a beautiful center. I'll send you the website, and you can see it, and a little tiny video that I didn't make it all. The kids made of themselves, and we just joined it all together. And it's so cute, a little concert that we did, a choir. But the language is always the problem here. We have different languages. We speak Portuguese, and there you speak English. So it also makes it difficult to have a good one-to-one conversation. I was struggling tonight. I was really struggling, but I was going to tell you why I was struggling. In my accident, I actually broke my ribs flying in the air. This was 3 months ago, and hit my cheekbone and my ear in the fall. So my balance has been affected, and I think there is something. I've lost words a little bit. I'm not as verbal as I was. That's why I've been avoiding doing this
conversation.
Don't put that there.
No, we are very grateful, Moira. We are so grateful, and hope.
Yeah, no, it's been adorable for me. And Ruth, courage. Have courage. Find something that doesn't have to take you out of your comfort zone. A school. Do a story about a school, old people's home, or something like that, where you're secure, and you do it in your time, I think time for me certainly it has to be like that. That's why I chose all these old people to photograph.
and to leave journalism. Yeah. It's been really rich, and there's so many things we didn't go deeply into that you mentioned. So we probably need 4 conversations to go deeper
anytime.
into
So
but it's been a real pleasure.
You don't publish me speaking with my hands going crazy.
It's been recorded, Moira.
Yeah, this is my first Zoom. I've never done a Zoom before.
Really? Wow, congratulations. And you managed.
And I really struggled. I really had to struggle because I have nobody here. This is, you know, there's nobody that even knows how to work this computer, you know. It's very backward here. Very. So you should
be in technology, but you are far
if I get the center working, Ruth, you'll be my first guest.
Yeah, I'll come and visit and give you some crash courses on these little things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I be next after Ruth, please?
Yeah. Okay. Music. So what music do you love? What music do you love?
Yes.
Good music.
Good music.
Yes.
Yeah.
All sorts of very good music.
Yeah. Okay. Do you sing?
No.
For me?
In the shower.
When no one's
in my dreams, I play upright bass, and I have a beautiful blues voice in my dreams.
Oh, in your dreams. Oh, fantastic. But you would have loved the times that we had with music, with all these Louis Moholos and everybody. Can you imagine how long that is? How long ago that is? Brotherhood.
And Moira, do you know that Jürgen passed away?
Huh?
You know that Jürgen passed away?
Yes, I know, recently.
Okay.
I was very close to Jürgen, but he was in a bad moment in his life. He was aggressive and could be really not very nice. But I'm talking 50-something years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Well, let me put exact date to it. 1962, 1963. You maybe weren't born yet.
No, I wasn't born. Not even an idea.
Before your time.
Yeah.
So, and he was really difficult. He had a bad marriage, and he could be difficult. But I learned a lot from him. To develop, even even in the dark room, I learned
printing,
cutting. We used to develop with the green light, where you could push the film because you could see it in the dark, in the green light. You can see the emulsion, so you could see how it was developing.
Yeah,
he was quite adventurous in that way, and a wonderful photographer, music photographer as well. But
and he did film at some point. Okay, I think
Yes, I think Nomusa is gonna have to do the farewells, otherwise we can talk.
Yes.
Okay, do her farewells.
Thank you all so much for being with us today for this conversation. Ruth, Moira, Ingrid, from the CKR team, we couldn't thank you enough. Thank you for opening up so many avenues. As you're saying, Ingrid, this could possibly be so many conversations, because I think we're beginning to realize, that the challenges of old are still here today. And I think we learn a lot through these conversations. So we couldn't be more privileged to be in your presence as we are today. We really, really do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And it was great meeting you ladies. For me, it was special to meet ladies.